This week on Let's Talk About Mental Health, I'm talking about panic, how to cope with panic during difficult times. So let's get talking. This is Let's Talk About Mental Health, a weekly podcast about mental health and wellbeing, hosted by Jeremy Godwin. Let's talk about mental health, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hello and welcome to episode 24 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, the weekly podcast about improving your mental health and wellbeing. I'm Jeremy Godwin. Thank you for joining me. This week's episode is Let's Talk About Panic. Now, I debated for quite a while about whether or not I was going to talk about everything that's been going on with COVID-19, previously referred to as coronavirus, but since it's now become an unavoidable topic and so many of us are either in quarantine or isolation or practicing social distancing, it's become a really important topic to discuss from a mental health standpoint. And so this week, I'm talking about how heightened states of panic and fear can affect our mental health, why it happens, both at an individual level as well as a collective level, and more importantly, how to handle it for the sake of your mental health and well-being. So let's talk. I'm recording this on March the 20th, and you'd have to be living under a rock not to be aware that so far, 2020 seems to have gone a little bit off the rails. You only have to step foot anywhere near a supermarket to become aware of the fact that people are acting like it's Armageddon, the real type and not the overly long and painful Michael Bay movie from 1998. We're currently seeing some really extreme behaviour across the world as people struggle with the panic and fear caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. But we're also seeing some amazing examples of human kindness as people come together to support one another through these trying times. Now, I've been particularly focused on this stuff from a mental health standpoint for the past few months. And I know I've said this before, but we here in Australia have gone through more than 5 months of severe bushfires and then all of the consequences that they've had. And that's been part of a major drought that's been going on for 3 or more years. And all of that has then led us straight into the outbreak of widespread panic over coronavirus. Now, not only am I really passionate about the work that I do in mental health and wellbeing, I live with anxiety. So I find myself reading the news online and having emotional reactions, as I'm sure many of you are at the moment, and then challenging myself to take a step back and look at why things are the way that they are at the moment, both in society and even within myself as an individual. So in other words, why I react with anxiety to the things that are going on in the world. Now, I know that makes me sound like I'm psychoanalyzing the hell out of everything, including myself, but I'm not. I'm just genuinely fascinated with understanding the why behind things, because I find that it then challenges me to take a more rational viewpoint and to respond to things in a more thought out and calm way, rather than just reacting. I mean, I don't get it right all the time, but it's a tool that seems to work for me. Anyway, because of all of that, you get this episode, which is me exploring this topic. And I don't think it's relevant just to what's going on with COVID-19. We experience panic with a whole bunch of things. You know, like I said, we went through it all with the bushfires here in Australia, etc., etc. There's always stuff going on. And so not only is this me exploring the topic of panic and mental health, but more importantly, it's about me providing some practical advice on dealing with panic, which is advice that you can apply to this current situation, as well as any kind of crisis or difficulty that you might be facing in any area of your life. So what is panic? Panic is defined as sudden uncontrollable fear or anxiety, often causing wildly unthinking behavior. Thanks, Apple Dictionary function, for that. And I wanted to share that very specific definition because there's some stuff to unpack there. First, sudden uncontrollable fear or anxiety is a very good description of how rapidly the massive hysteria has happened over the past few weeks thanks to the global spread of COVID-19. And it's been a real snowball effect. I mean, it's understandable why people are panicked. Even if our rational minds are telling us that things will be okay, it's terrifying to go to the supermarket and see shelves that are stripped bare. And that can then trigger our own self-preservation reactions, no matter how rational you might think that you are. The second piece of that definition is causing wildly unthinking behavior. And I think that that is the most challenging and potentially dangerous part of panic, the unpredictable and irrational way that it can make people act. When panic takes over, we act on instinct rather than logic, and our fight, flight, or freeze response takes over, and we then experience a range of physical and mental effects. In fact, if you want to have a look at the transcript, I will include a link to an excellent article by Anxiety Canada, which breaks down all of the physical symptoms of fight, flight, freeze. It's a really, really interesting read. Anyway, we're seeing that now with people who are stocking up on toilet paper for a disease which does not cause gastrointestinal issues. The rational side is what the hell's going on, but the fear of running out of toilet paper is completely irrational. The panic, however, is all too real. So why is panic such an issue for mental health? Well, the thing about panic is that it takes away your control. Because when you allow fear to control you, then you are far more likely to make decisions that don't necessarily consider the full range of consequences of your actions. So being able to get yourself out of panic and back into rational thought as quickly as possible is absolutely essential, because that will then enable you to make more rational decisions. And I'll cover some techniques to do that shortly. The other thing to be aware of is that panic can tend to be contagious, which is why you need to be conscious of what situations you put yourself in. You need to be vigilant about your mental health when talking to other people or going on social media. And you also need to choose to focus on the positive. Now look, there is no question whatsoever that these sorts of challenging times make it difficult to focus on the positive. But what good does giving into panic do us, individually or collectively? Panic, fear, and hysteria serve no purpose other than to create more panic, fear, and hysteria. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. I was talking to an older lady in the checkout line at the supermarket the other day, and we were discussing that we're both taking the position of not giving in to this doomsday style of shopping that people are doing, because all that does is add to the problem. She was so lovely, and to be honest, I just wanted to give her a hug, but, social distancing and all that. The thing is that when stuff is happening in your life or in the world that is scary and confronting, we each have two choices. We can yield to fear, or we can hold on to hope. If your own health and well-being, both mental and physical, are truly important to you, then you'll know deep down inside that the only way to get through a crisis is to calmly make your way through the crisis one step at a time. If you tear out all of your hair and run screaming down the middle of the street, you're not doing yourself or anyone any good, and you're just going to have to wear a wig later on. Let's call it what it is. We panic because we are afraid. It is a heightened state of emotion that is born out of a fear of loss and a fear of being without control. However, as I've said many times before in this program, control is an illusion. The only things that you have actual control over are your words, your actions, and your feelings. And so when it comes to things that are going on around you, either in your life or in the broader community, you can either react with panic or react with realism. There's a saying by an unknown author that goes, "Things don't happen to you, they just happen." And with the current crisis going on with coronavirus, saying that is more true now than ever before, just as it will be the next time that you face a crisis in your life. Things happen. It's up to each of us to respond in a way that makes the most out of the situation so that we don't end up making it worse. Some people will overreact, some people will underreact. Like the people who are complaining about the clampdown on social gatherings because it's affecting their ability to go to the football. It's up to each of us, though, to find the happy medium between overreacting and underreacting. And instead of that reaction, it's about responding to the situation as it is. Reaction takes on all of the emotion. Look, how people react is their own issue to work through. And I know it's hard, but don't judge. If people aren't enlightened enough to realize that they're behaving like arseholes, then that's on them. I know that doesn't get you toilet paper or canned food, but we're not running out of food. This is not the zombie apocalypse, and things will settle down eventually. This is something I say a lot in Let's Talk About Mental Health. You can't control what happens. You cannot control what is going on outside of you. All you can control is your own contribution to what's happening. In other words, your own words, actions, and feelings. So in a crisis, if you choose to act and speak and feel sensibly, then you have full control over what you do with whatever comes your way. Whether it's global panic or it's more local, if it's panic about something that's going on in your own life, say with your immediate family, you always have a choice. You can either go into meltdown mode or you can calmly and rationally take things one day at a time. Either way, you cannot control external factors, so don't make the situation worse by taking on board all of that external drama, which serves no purpose other than to increase your blood pressure and make you stressed. Now, I say all of that, but nobody's perfect. I mean, look, I get it. I woke up this morning feeling incredibly anxious. I had a really rough sleep last night. I had weird dreams, and I'm already a bit heightened with everything that's going on. And it only got worse because, unfortunately, I had to go to the supermarket today to buy stuff for the weekend. And that was a nightmare. But the trick is to recognize that it's happening and to then work consciously on detaching yourself from the emotion. Now, I know that for me, I tend to be very susceptible to how people are feeling around me. I've talked many times in this podcast about how contagious energy can be. And so I needed to gently remind myself over and over again today that I was feeling anxious because of the environment that I was in. Extra shoppers, the car park was full the moment that the shops were open. It was chaos. And I mean, I live in the country, so I can only imagine what it's like in the city. So I had to remind myself of all of that. And then once I got everything done, and then once I started driving home, once I got closer to home, I was able to calm myself and reset. And so on that note, let's talk about what you can do to deal with panic and manage your mental health in a crisis. First, educate yourself. Now, whether it's something crazy happening in your town or country or the world, or just something happening in your own life, put on your rational thinking hat and choose to take the time to get the facts. And I'm not talking about getting the facts from a tabloid magazine next to a story about how Michael Jackson was just seen at the 7-Eleven buying a burrito. I'm talking about real news, based on quality scientific evidence. We managed to get ourselves out of the dark ages thanks to a focus on science, and this is one of the most important times in our history as a civilization where science needs to be what we focus on. If it's becoming difficult to find impartial and objective news sources that don't have 43 hysterical articles about whatever's happening, then go to a better source. For example, with coronavirus, I'm finding that reading just the regular news updates, even on the one that I read, which is ABC here in Australia, which is very good for fact-based reporting, but it's out of control with the amount of articles. And it's like they're reporting every little fact of what's going on. So I'm finding that reading updates from the World Health Organization and the UN is actually helping me now to keep across what's going on globally with far less impact on my anxiety than the regular news sources. So just think about where you're consuming your information from. Do be educated, but take the time to educate yourself in a rational way. Now, if you're dealing with some type of panic-inducing trauma in your own life, educate yourself about what is going on. For example, if it's a medical issue for you or a loved one, get the facts rather than jumping to conclusions. In late 2016, not long after a really good friend of mine died from breast cancer, I found a lump under my right nipple and I freaked the hell out. Now, instead of going to the doctor, I Googled the symptoms, which is the worst thing that you can do. And that made things way worse because, of course, Dr. Google said it was cancer. And that sent me into an absolute spiral. And I was already depressed over my friend passing away, and I just went off the edge. And it delayed me going to the doctor because I was terrified, which made things worse. Now, when I finally went, weeks later, and then once I got the test results back, it turned out that I just had a nasty case of being fat, which was actually what started me on the very long journey to losing weight. So anyway, my point, whatever it is that's going on, don't jump to conclusions, don't self-diagnose, and don't be an alarmist. Get the facts and then work from there. And for the love of puppies, please do not bury your head in the sand either, because that little voice in your head still knows that deep down you're actually shitting yourself over whatever it is. So get the facts quickly so that you can respond to whatever is going on. Now, a what not to do item that I'd like to flag here, which is specific to big events and crises like what's happening now is under no circumstance should you sit and watch the news, especially not the 24/7 news channels. I'm old enough to remember the first Gulf War in the early 90s, and it was the first really big conflict that was covered non-stop on the news. And I'd often end up at my friend's house and we would just sit there watching it for hours on end, and it was like a car crash, horrifying, but something that was nearly impossible to look away from. Consume news thoughtfully and mindfully. Avoid the news channels and the tabloids completely, and instead get your news from reputable sources. Like I said, I'm relying on WHO and UN for major stuff, plus government updates in my country and my state. And then I only read a national news site that is fact-driven and impartial in its reporting, because I don't need anyone adding their anxiety on top of my own. I'm pretty good at working out every worst-case scenario possible for myself. I don't need any help in that department. If you need to take a break from social media, then do so. Now, I know that might seem counterintuitive at the moment if you're dealing with isolation, but I don't know about you. I'm finding that social media can, depending on the time of day, can actually end up adding to my anxiety at the minute because everyone seems to be sharing their anxiety. So you need to make the choices that feel right to you. Because prevention is better than cure, get plenty of rest and self-care, and it is never too late to start. There's a saying by an unknown author that goes, "I am exhausted from trying to be stronger than I feel." And the reality is that many of us become emotionally exhausted when there's a major crisis going on in our own lives or in the world. Sometimes you need to give yourself time and patience and take some time to rest so that you can then ride it out and recover. Pushing yourself may just be too much. I know that for me, when I have particularly bad anxiety attacks, often the only thing that works for me is being curled up on the couch under a blanket and watching something on TV that then calms me down. But that doesn't mean that you should necessarily withdraw from the world every time you feel a bit anxious. But identify what works for you at different levels of panic or fear or anxiety. And bear in mind that the way that you deal with mild panic will quite likely need to be different from how you look after yourself during severe panic episodes. Take plenty of time for self-care and make it a daily practice. And for tips on that, have a listen to or read episode 6 of Let's Talk About Mental Health for some specific advice around self-care. My next piece is to take the time to understand why you might be feeling panic. So what a surprise that I would tell you to dig into the why. I think I say it every single episode, and with good reason. If you just deal with the emotion rather than its cause, then you're not dealing with the actual problem. Is it fear of something specific happening? Is it loss of control? Is it uncertainty? Is it fear of losing someone close to you? You need to uncover what's going on within yourself, because panic is a response to fear. Further to that, feel what you need to feel, but choose not to give in to it. You are in control over whether you respond to a crisis with panic and fear, which of course creates more panic and fear, or calmness and rationality, which then creates more calmness and rationality. The choice is always yours, regardless of how bad the situation is. Acknowledge how you're feeling and recognize that it's your mind trying to make sense of a frightening situation. Thank your mind for trying to protect you, and then breathe slowly through it to settle your mind. Count to 10, 20, 30, whatever you need to calm yourself. Speaking of, practice breathing exercises. That count to 10 or 21 can be really helpful. Don't just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because, that's going to make you more anxious. But gently breathe in and breathe out. And do that for 10 counts or 20 or whatever you need. Another one that's really well known and effective is square breathing. So that's where you breathe in for the count of 4, hold for the count of 4, exhale for the count of 4, hold for 4, and then inhale again for 4, and so on and so forth. So square breathing. If you're feeling really panicked, then just taking the time to breathe and recover your composure before doing anything else can be really helpful. Another one, which is a bit of a personality thing, find the humour where you can. Regular listeners will know by now that I have a bit of a dry sense of humour, and today was no exception. I quite often find the humour in the little things in life, I went to buy chicken stock at the supermarket and every brand of the low salt one was sold out, but nobody was touching the full salt stuff. And I don't know why, it just made me laugh out loud because even in the midst of all these empty shelves and this craziness, people are still like, better not have too much salt in my diet. I don't know why, but I found that hilarious. Anyway, find the humor where you can. When there are big crises going on, like the current COVID-19 pandemic, make sensible decisions. So things like having a daily routine and sticking to it, especially if you're stuck at home, don't abuse alcohol or substances, and focus on doing healthy things that make you feel good. Newsflash, you don't need to go to a gym to exercise or look after your health. I know, who knew? As well as making sensible decisions, also choose to be accepting of others and choose to be kind. Don't take your fear or your anger out on people just because they belong to a specific group, which is pretty much a rule to live all of your life by if you don't want to be a complete arsehole. Be respectful of other people and their fears, but also keep a safe emotional distance. I have a family member who I love, but who tends to dump their emotional baggage whenever I speak to them. So if I'm not prepared before that conversation, then I walk away feeling like I've been hit by a truck. You can choose what to take on board and what to deflect for the sake of your mental health. And always remember that you don't need to add fuel to the fire when there's a crisis. So for further advice on coping with challenging situations, there are quite a few past episodes of Let's Talk About Mental Health, which you might also find useful because they contain practical suggestions for things that you can do to tackle other aspects of panic and fear. Now, I covered overthinking in episode 4, self-care in episode 6, stress in episode 8, fear in episode 10, and last week in episode 23, I covered resilience. Plus, you might also find the priorities episode 3, to be helpful. Lots of different things that you can do. If you're interested, you can jump back and have a listen to those, or you can read them on the website at letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. Just find them under the episodes tab. There are many things that you can do to manage your mental health when you're faced with a crisis. And as always, I remind you that the big one is to ask for help when you need it. You don't need to handle these things on your own, and nor should you, because a problem shared is a problem halved. You will get through this. So just take things one day at a time and focus on what is within your control. So that is nearly it for our chat about panic and mental health. To wrap up this episode, here are a few points to consider. Number 1. Panic is a protection mechanism, and if we allow it to take control of us, then we are far less likely to make rational decisions. Number 2. Taking the time to educate yourself on what is happening from reliable and objective sources, as well as seeking to understand why you might be feeling panicked, is one approach that will help you to work through things more rationally. And number 3. Remember that you are never alone. There is always someone that you can talk to, and often you will find people who are going through similar experiences, so connect with others to work through what's going on. As always, I'm going to share a quote that I'd like to encourage you to reflect on and consider what it means for you. This week's quote is by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it is, "Nothing can bring you peace but yourself." Let me repeat that. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Alright, so to summarize, when we're dealing with major challenges in our lives, it can be difficult to avoid panic and remain calm. However, letting ourselves be controlled by fear and panic will just serve to generate more fear and panic. What we need to do is find ways to calm ourselves so that we can focus on taking things one step at a time and one day at a time, which will then enable us to make rational choices that are in the best interests of our well-being and mental health. I hope this week's episode gave you some useful and practical advice on the subject of panic and mental health. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell someone that you know about it because word of mouth is a great way to help other people find the show, and please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. Next week's episode will be about uncertainty. Continuing the theme of what we've been talking about, I'll be discussing how to manage your mental health during times of uncertainty, whether big or small. I hope you'll join me for that episode, which will be released on Monday morning Australian time, Sunday evening in the UK and Ireland, and Sunday afternoon in the US and Canada. On Friday, I'll be sending out the next issue of the Mental Health Talk newsletter, which is a weekly roundup of articles and resources that are focused on good mental health and well-being. You can find that and past episodes of Let's Talk About Mental Health at the website, which is letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. That's letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. And you can also sign up there to have new posts delivered to your inbox. Have an absolutely fantastic week. Look after yourself, and now more than ever, make a conscious effort to put kindness out into the world, because what you put out comes back to you. Take care and talk to you next time.